Okay, it is great to be back with everyone. We had a couple weeks off, and I definitely missed the Parsha Shir. Thankfully, it was all good stuff happening, but still, it's better when we can be together. So,
Amen.
so we are now in Sefer Bamidbar, and we are in Parshat Beha'alotecha, um, which, as we'll see, is begins with the command to Aaron. I think we looked at this in previous year to light the menorah. We have the exchange with Moshe and Chovav ben Reuel, presumably Yitro, his father-in-law. We also in previous years looked at this, and then the whole second half of the parsha contains a number of what we'll call sins. And it ends with the Miriam and Aaron speaking disparagingly about Moshe's wife. There's a lot of really rich material here. And hopefully, what I chose to focus on this year is you'll find to be one of those rich material sections.
Good.
So we are at towards the end of chapter 10, and we begin with Moshe's discussion with his father-in-law. We or this Chovav ben Reuel, right? There's some discussion, some debate among the commentaries about who this person really is, but for us, it's not the focus of our talk tonight. So let's just assume that it is indeed Yitro. Vayomer Moshe lechovav ben Ruel hamidyani chotin Moshe nosim anachnu el hamakom asher amar Hashem oto otin lachem l'cha itanu ve'tavnu lach ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. So Moshe says to Chovav ben Ruel, his father-in-law, we are going to the place that God has promised us, and you should come with us, and God will provide for you and do good for you. So Chovav responds back and he says, nope, no thank you. I'm not going to go with you. I'm going to go back to my country, to my homeland. Vayomer al na ta'azov otanu, ki al kain yadata chanotenu bamidbar vayita lanu le'inayim. Moshe says, please don't leave us. You know about all our travels in the desert. And there's again the big debate how to translate, whether it should be translated as "you were our eyes" or "you will be our eyes." Um, right? What is Moshe? What exactly is Moshe asking of him? Again, not our focus for tonight, but there is that is an important piece of this whole thing. If you go with us, then all the good that God has promised us, He will do for you as well. And that's it. We don't get the final response from Yitro. Right? Everyone assumes that he left. He did not go with them, although there is evidence that at least his descendants remained, or some of his children remained. But from the simple shot of the Torah, we don't get an explicit answer. But most assume that he does not go with them in the end. Then the Torah tells us, verse 33, "Vayisume har Hashem derech shlosheh yamim, ve'aron b'it Hashem noseh lifneihem derech shlosheh yamim lator lehem menucha." They traveled from the Mount of God for 3 days, and the Ark of the Covenant went before them for 3 days in order to find a resting place. The cloud of God was over them when they traveled from the camp. And here's a verse which I assume is familiar to all of us. Vayhi bin soa ha'aron vayomer Moshe kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. When the ark would travel, Moshe would say, "Arise, God, and your enemies will disperse, and your enemies will run from in front of you." Uvnu yomar, and when it rested, Moshe would say, "Shuvah Hashem revivot alfei Yisrael." Return, O Eternal One, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. And then the next thing we read is the beginning of chapter 11. Vayhi ha'am kimit onanim ra ba'oznei Hashem, vayishma Hashem vaycharapo b'tzivar bam eish Hashem v'tochal b'ksei ha'machaneh. The nation became like complainers in the ears of God, and God heard, and he got very angry, He sent fire, and it consumed them. Vaitzakam el Moshe, Vaipila Moshe el Hashem, Vatishka Ish, and they cried, complained to Moshe, and Moshe cried out to God, and the fire subsided. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. And I gave you all the, seemingly there's three separate things, right? There's the exchange with Yitro, there's the traveling of the nation, and there's the complaint. And I gave you the context is important, but we're really focused on the middle section, the traveling of the ark. And specifically, it's a little bit hidden in the source sheets, but it's there. If you look at verse 35, and let's do it this way, to 36, there's something curious that appears. And if you're not sure, then look at the title of the shir.
The converted Nuns.
Yes, there are two backward-facing Nuns that bracket these two verses. Everyone see it now?
I found one of them. Let's see.
Yeah. So here and here. And it appears this way in the Sefer Torah as well. When we read from the Torah this coming Shabbos, you can see, whoever gets, I don't remember which aliyah this is, but you can see it in the Sefer Torah itself, that there are these inverted nuns that appear in the Sefer Torah, which is very strange because generally the Torah doesn't have any punctuation marks. So the question for tonight is, what is going on? Why do we have these backward nuns, and what are they what message do they carry? What do they teach us? Okay, that everyone good on our question for the evening?
Indeed.
Okay.
So
before we get into anything in our section, it is worth noting that there's one other place in Tanakh where we see similar backward nuns. And that's in Tehillim Kuf Zayin, chapter 107, which is the chapter that we say, it's a very long chapter of Tehillim. It's the chapter that we say on Yom HaAtzmaut. And Aaron usually leads it with some nice tunes. But if you look, right, so beginning with verse 23 there, right before, right, I mean, the context maybe even isn't that important. The more significant is just the fact that they're there than what this means, but it's a beautiful chapter of Psalms. So this is saying, Yordei hayam ba'aniyot, osei melacha b'mayim rabim. Others go down to the sea in ships, ply their trade in the mighty waters. Hema ra'u ma'aseh Hashem v'niflotav mitzulah. They see the wonders of God and such wonders in the deep. Vayomer vayamod ruach sa'ara b'toromim galav. God's word raised a storm wind that made the waves surge. Ya'alu shamayim yerdu tehomot nafsham bera'atit mogag. The heavens mountain up to the heaven, plunging down to the depths, disgorging in their misery, right? They're experiencing really bad, rough seas. Yachogu v'yanu kishikor v'chol chachmatam titzbala. They reeled and staggered like a drunk, all their skill to no avail. And they cried out to God in their adversity, and God saved them from their troubles. Okay, so liturgically, this is, if it's familiar to us at all, it would be from Yom HaAtzmaut. This is the psalm that the chief rabbinate identified as appropriate to say. And in the Gemara, it says that this psalm is the source for Birkat HaGomel. Is the source for the bracha that we say after surviving a dangerous experience. Right, so it has its precedent both in the Korban Toda and the Thanksgiving offering, as well as this psalm. So again, the question is, why are there these backward nuns appearing in Psalm 107? Anyone want to venture a guess? All right, so let's see what the Gemara says. So first explaining Psalm 107. So quotes from our verse again. Yordei hayam baniot osei milacha b'mayim rabim himar masei Hashem v'gomer. Right, quotes right the sailors who go down to sea in the deep seas, and God brings the storm. And God then saves them, right? They cry out to God, Yodul Hashem Chasto, they will thank God for his kindness. So the Gemara says, Aselahem Simaniot, Ki'akin Virakin Shebatorah. These nuns, which bracket the verses that we just read, are some sort of sign, just like the words Ach and Rak in the Torah. What does Ach and Rak mean?
Rock means only.
Only. Yeah, and ach we usually translate as but or however.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there are conditions, right? It's some sort of conditional that the Tehillim is making us aware to. Lomar lecha sa'aku kodem gzardin ne'enin. Sa'aku la'achar gzardin inan ne'enin. It teaches that if they cry out to God before gizardin, before the verdict, as it were, is issued, then they'll be answered and saved. But once the verdict against them is issued, then they won't be answered and they will presumably die at sea or be caught in this horrible storm and whatever's going to happen to them. Okay, so it says that these nuns indicate a conditional, that the salvation comes only if they cry out to God and the proper time before a verdict is issued, or however we want to understand the Gizar Din, the judgment being passed. Okay, the Gemara in Shabbos gives a very different explanation, though, for the nuns that appear in our passage in Parashat Beha'alotecha. Okay, so the passage from Tehillim is an interesting aside. I'm not sure if we can find any other connection. Right? It's the only. Yeah.
The passage in Tehillim has the nun at the beginning of each verse, right?
Yes.
And in the Torah, it's like a bookend.
It's bracketed, correct. So it's not exactly the same. And some say that that this is just sort of like some technique of whether the nun is of significance we'll come to later on in our passage, but maybe it's not, maybe it's just whatever convention they use to note something of interest. But we'll come back to that question in a bit. So concerning our passage, the Gemara in Shabbos tells us as follows. Tanu Rabbanan, and tell me when I need to scroll down in the English, please. Vayibin Soa Haron Vayomer Moshe begins by quoting our verse. When the ark would travel, Moshe would say, Parshazu Asala HaKadosh Baruch Hu Simaniyot Milmala Ulamata. So God gave special signs, special symbols to this passage before and afterwards. Lomar She'in Ze Mikoma. And the significance is to indicate that the passage does not appear in its proper place. Most understand that means in its proper chronological place. It gets us into the debate of Yesh Mukdamu Muchar LaTorah or Ein Mukdamu Muchar LaTorah. Does the Torah follow chronological sequence or not? And we've seen this debate in other contexts as well. Right? It's a machlokes between Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi generally, Rashi is of the opinion that Ein Mukdamu Muchar, that the Torah does not necessarily follow chronological order. And the Ramban thinks that it does and it should. Okay, so the Gemara tells us that the significance of the nuns is to teach us that this passage does not appear in its proper place. Rabbi Omer, that's the first opinion. Rabbi gives a different opinion. Lo min Hashem hu zeh. It's not for that reason that the nuns appear. Ella mipnei shesefer chashuv hu bifnei atzmo. Rather, it's because this passage, these two verses, are considered a sefer, considered a book unto themselves. Perhaps the shortest book in the history of books. I don't know if there's a shorter book than 2 sentences that was ever published. But Rebbe says this is a separate sefer, a separate book. right? So obviously we don't rule like Rebbe because we talk about the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Torah, and not the 7 books of Torah. But Rebbe is of the position that there are 7 books of the Torah. Kuman Azla Hada Amar Rebbe Shmuel Bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So right to support this, it brings an aside question. There is a statement that's brought by Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Chatzva Amudeha Shiv'a. Elu Shiva Sifrei Torah. Quotes a verse from Mishlei. With wisdom she built her house. She carved its 7 pillars. The 7 pillars is Shiva Sifrei Torah, refers to 7 books of the Torah. So who does that follow? That must follow Rebbe, because Rebbe thinks that this is a Sefer Bifnei Atzmo. So if that's true, then what comes before it would be 1 book. That's a book, and then whatever comes after it in Sefer Bamidbar is a book. So Sefer Bamidbar, which we see as 1 book, Rebbe says should be divided into 3, and therefore you get a total of 7. Montana de Pali Gale de Rebbe. So who is the rabbi, the sage who argues, who disagrees with Rebbe, and does not think that there's 7 books of the Torah? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Atida Parsha Zu Shetear Ker Mikan V'Tikatev Bimkoma. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that this parsha, these 2 verses, will be uprooted and eventually, ultimately, will be written in their proper place. Lama katva kan. So why do they appear here and not in their proper place? Kidei lahafsik ben poranut rishona leporanut shniya. In order to bring an interruption between the first punishment and the second punishment. Poranut shniya mahi. What is the second punishment? That's the easier one to identify. It's vayihi ka'aham kamit onanim. It's the complaints that they bring against Moshe right immediately after, which we saw at the beginning of chapter 11. Poranut vishona. What's the first punishment? Vayisume har Hashem. They left Mount Sinai. V'amar Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina shesaru me'acharei Hashem. Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina says this means that they left God. They fled from God. Behechan mikoma, where is its proper place? Amar Ashi b'degalim. It should appear with the description of the flags and the camp, and when the camp traveled, that's where it should go. Okay, so in this Gemara we see 2 opinions about what the significance of the backward nuns are. According to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, why do we have the backward nuns?
Because it's the wrong place.
No, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi
Oh,
Yehuda.
sorry.
He says it establishes these pasukim as a sefer.
Okay, so to demarcate them as their own separate sefer of Tanakh. And according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Beatrice,
that it's in the wrong place.
it's in the wrong place, and the reason it was taken out of its proper place and put here is to bring a buffer between the various punishments that are described.
I have a question about the earlier or later question.
Okay.
So if it seems it's in the wrong place, not chronologically wrong place, but thematically wrong place. Because if it's something that was done,
right,
moved, it doesn't have an exact chronological spot.
Yeah, I mean, there is a chronological, meaning like it does describe the traveling of the camp, right? So I think what he's saying is its proper place would be the first time the camp traveled after it was set up, would be its proper place.
Right.
So there is some chronological element, but right, it is more thematic. It's a somewhere in between chronological and thematic.
Was there an expectation or a requirement or a benefit that the people should stay at the foot of Har Sinai?
Great
For
question.
eternity until Ribono Shel Olam says that's it, we go to the next stage. And instead, they leave because they want to go to Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? Number one, we know that they traveled al pi Hashem yachanu al pi Hashem yisaru, that they traveled based on God's word, right? Either a direct communication to Moshe, or they had a good sign that it was time to move because the cloud would lift up. So what does it mean that they left Har Sinai? They would only leave if the cloud lifts, right? So what's problematic about that? And a further question, which Robert, you already alluded to, right? They think they're going straight to Eretz Yisrael, right? And that is probably the plan until the spies are sent and get in the way of everything. But they're on their way to Eretz Yisrael. That's a bad thing?
And isn't there mention a little bit later on that the people some of them are complaining because they had to go so fast. They had to cover a 1-day journey in 3 days.
Rashi brings that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's brought in the Midrashim. Yes.
Yeah. So it is bewildering. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer these, to begin to answer this question that Robert raises, let's go to the Tosfot source number 6. Omer Ri. So the Ri Rabbeinu Yitzchak says, "De'ein yara li kain ela parnot bishana k'da'amar b'medrash va'yisu shenasu mehar Sinai derech shloshet yamim." And this is going to get to what you were alluding to. The first punishment is for the fact that they left Har Sinai, a journey of 3 days. And the Medrash says, "Ketino kayotze mi beit hasefer sheboreach lo." Right, so it's coming to the end of the school year, so this is familiar perhaps to some of us, but it's like a child leaving school, running away from school, right? So a child is very excited when school ends, whether it's the school day or the end of the school year. They run home, and maybe they'll run so fast that they'll cover a 3 days journey in just 1 day because they're so excited to be done. Ki hayu barchim mehar Sinai derech shloshet yamim lifnei shelamdu harbei Torah b'Sinai. Right, they left Sinai and they traveled a journey of 3 days. And Tosfot says the reason for this is because they learned a lot of Torah at Sinai. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu nismoch paranot leparanot. Okay, fine. So to further elaborate, we need to see the Ramban. So the Tosfot tells us that the sin is that they were excited to leave Har Sinai.
Because they're not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to do Torah, to act it out, to obey Torah, until they're in the place where all the mitzvot can be performed.
Yeah.
Chutz la'aretz is limited in what mitzvot can be performed. And so they're excited. They want to get to where they can do zrizim makdimim lemitzvah. Those who are really, really enthusiastic.
Yeah.
They want to get to the point where they can do the mitzvah.
I agree. So why is this so bad? So the Ramban further elaborates. The Ramban says, we'll just read the bolded piece of the Ramban. Inyan ha-midrash hazeh. So what the real meaning of this midrash is, Matsu oto ba'agada, shenasu mehar Sinai besimcha, kitinok haborech mebeit hasefer. Right, that they left Har Sinai happily, like a child being dismissed from school. Amru, Shema yarbeh lanu, v'yitain lanu mitzvot. God already gave us 613 mitzvot. If we stay longer, he's going to give us more. This is already so much. So they were running away to avoid getting more mitzvot, according to the Ramban's understanding. Unclear if he had a version of the Medrash that says this, or that's how he's reading it. V'zehu vayisu mehar Hashem. That's the significance of they left the mountain of God. Shayam achshvatam lasiyatzman misham mipnei shehu har Hashem. Right, they wanted to. Right, it was specifically that this was the mountain of God, the mountain where God was communicating to them. They wanted to leave and not be burdened by anything more. Okay, pretty radical understanding from the Ramban and the Tosfot, but they say that's why that is what the punishment was for. That they were punished for the attitude with which they left Har Sinai. Any questions or thoughts on that?
What are the mitzvahs that you make a point of teaching to a ger or a candidate for to convert? Do
Yeah.
you teach the most difficult ones, or do you do some of the easier ones and then
The Gemara
more
says it's a
demanding?
combination. You say mixat mitzvot kalot and mixat mitzvot chamirot. Teach some easy ones and some more difficult ones.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So there's with this background, there's a lot to there's a lot of different ways it can go. So one of them, and this is really an idea that I first heard, and I think I want to say it's sort of attributed to Rabbi Soloveitchik. Although in source number 5, we have Menachem Leibtag summarizing it without any attribution to Rabbi Soloveitchik. So, maybe someone said it before. I'm not sure. But anyway, he's focusing on the 3 books. And what does it mean that Sefer Bamidbar should be divided into 3 books? So he says that our parsha, our passage, I don't want to call it a parsha, we'll confuse it with Parsha Beha'alotecha, but our passage of Vayibin Soharon is really a transitional point. Up until now, we've had, right, from chapter 1 of Bamidbar till chapter 10, we've had sort of the setting up of the camp. We've had the census, we had where every tribe should go, right? The method, the way in which they're going to travel through the desert, right? That's setting up, right? What he says, Bnei Israel's technical and spiritual preparation for this journey. There's logistics and how they're going to travel. There's sort of the spiritual message. The Mishkan is in the center. We have the role of the Kohanim and the Levium and being the educators and the religious leaders, right? We're laying the groundwork to go into the promised land. And then if we look, right, skip over our 2 verses from chapter 11 till the end of Sefer Bamidbar, just as a series of everything that goes wrong. We have the mitonanim, the complaints. We have the desire for meat. We have the spies in next week's parsha, the rebellion of Korach. A lot of things that go wrong. A lot of rebellion, a lot of bad things, right? And that explains why they don't realize the vision that was set up in the first section of the book. Right? We have the stage set for them to live in their camp, travel, and go directly into Eretz Yisrael. We know in the final part of the book, we'll call it that they don't realize that they're not successful, and what our 2 verses do, this very short book unto itself, is provide the vision for what could have been. Right? I think of it as one of those choose your own adventure books. So we know what happened after they left Har Sinai is that things just fell off a cliff and there was a lot of sins, a lot of things that went bad. But if they would have followed through on the vision that was set up in the first half, then they would have traveled Vayibin Saharon, all of their enemies would have run away and trembled before them, and they would have gone straight to Eretz Yisrael. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. It would have been a straight shot, and everything would have been beautiful. So that's the idea of the significance of these 3 books and why we have this very short passage as sort of the key transition point or the key moment in Sefer Bamidbar is this is how things could have been had Bnei Israel lived up to the expectations placed on them, but because they didn't, so then we go on to the 3rd section, which describes what happened in reality and not what could have been. Okay, so there is a very well-known public lecture drasha from Rabbi Soloveitchik playing this out a little bit more. But that's the basic idea, is that the significance of our passage is to show that this is what could have been had things gone as originally planned. So that's one idea. Came across another, and again, there's a lot of commentaries and thoughts written about all this. But another really interesting thought that I came across is from the Tzvor Hamor, Avraham Saba, right? He's one of those Jews that was born in Spain and was exiled and then was exiled from Portugal. He eventually winds up in Morocco. The biography I read said that he actually, in his, being chased from one place to another, buried the manuscript of this work in Portugal, in Lisbon. And I don't know how they eventually discovered it, if he came back for it or he let someone know where it was. But anyway, there was some sort of miraculous way in which the commentary was survived and came into publication. So he gives a really interesting explanation, and specifically not only on why we have this interruption, but why specifically it's demarcated with the letter Nun. Okay, so that's here. That's what he's going to focus on, is why specifically the letter Nun. Right, so he begins by quoting from here, from this point on, from our passage of Ayimin Saron, they start regressing and not going in the proper direction. As the rabbis say, he was like a child running away from school. Vayisu mehar Hashem, lo al pi Hashem, right? They left the mount of God, not at God's directive. Avalheim nazaru achar, ayu kefuye tova, right? They were ungrateful, and they left with an attitude that showed they were not grateful to God. They did not remember all the kindness that God had done for them. Right? The ark of God was going before them. The cloud was providing cover for them. Right? Also that all the enemies ran away from them. Okay, so there was a lot of good, a line of kindness that God was doing for them, and they seemed to not recognize that. Et cetera, et cetera. Now, if we pick up in the bolded in the Hebrew, Hatam shesamu nunin menuzarot yoter mishar otiot. So why specifically was the letter nun used to demarcate that this is a section which is out of its proper place, that this is a transitional section, that this is a sefer b'fnei atzmo? Why specifically the letter nun? Near Eli, lefi shahim kafru b'tovat ha'ananim shahaya anan Hashem nosea lifneihem umeachareihem uminat tzdadim. Because the good and the kindness which they were denying, or which they were ungrateful for, was specifically that associated with the clouds, which enveloped them on all sides. This was one of the greatest kindness that God had done for them. Since they denied the good, they were ungrateful for the good extended to them with the clouds. God wanted to make them aware of their sin, which was a rejection, as it were, of the clouds. So therefore God put two nuns as a sign. Why two nuns? Because the Hebrew word for cloud is anan, which has two nuns in it. Shnei nunin shel anan. B'inyan sheyashuvu el Hashem. And so this was meant to prod them to return to God. Right, so that's the message that he sees here. Okay, I thought that was a pretty interesting creative read. Again, I'm not sure that that's the pshat of the Torah, but it's an interesting explanation for why the letter Nun. Um, I heard, and this is from Rabbi Baruch Simon, who teaches at Yeshiva University. He kind of riffs on this and brings in another really interesting passage, which kind of relates to it. Okay, so it's a little bit far afield, or it may feel like it, but I I thought it was pretty cool, and interesting. So he points us to further on in Sefer Bamidbar, right in the aftermath of the after the spies, 40 years of wandering. By the end of Sefer Bamidbar, they're ready to enter into Eretz Yisrael, I guess, a second time. And as they're preparing for that, Moshe sends messengers to Edom and to a few other nations asking for permission to pass through their land. That's what we're going to pick up. So we're source number 9, chapter 20. Vaishlach Moshe malachim mikadesh melech Edom. Moshe sends messengers to the king of Edom. Ko amar achicha Yisrael atayidate kol atlasher metzatanu. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all that has happened to us. Vayerdu avotinu mitzrayma vaneshav mitzrayim yamim rabim. We went down to Egypt. We were there for a long time. They mistreated us. We called out to God. God saved us, etc. Pick up in verse 17. Na'abra na be'artzecha. Let us pass through your land. Lo na'avor basadeh uvekerem lo nishteh mei be'er derech hamelech neilech lo niteh yamin usmol ad asher na'avor gvulecha. Let us pass through your land. We won't go in the fields. We won't go in the vineyards. We won't drink your well water. We'll go on the derech hamelech, the path of the king. Right? Many understand that to be like a common travel, a highway, as it were. And we won't veer right or left until we pass through your borders. Vayomer elav melech Edom lo ta'avor. Lo ta'avor bi pen becherev eitzei likartecha. You cannot pass through my land, and if you do, I'm going to come and fight you with the sword. Vayomer elav b'nei Yisrael b'msila na'aleh v'im meimecha nishteh aniu miknai v'natati michram rak ein davar b'raglai evora. So Bnei Yisrael say back to him, we'll stay on the path. If we drink of your water, either us or the cattle, we'll pay. Just let us pass through on our legs. Vayomer lo ta'avor. Vayetze Edom likrato be'am kaved uviyad chazaka. And again, Edom says you can't pass through, and Edom goes out to meet them with a great army. Vayima'in Edom nitonet Yisrael avor bigvulo. Vayeti Yisrael me'alav. Edom refused to let them pass, so Bnei Yisrael steered away and went on a different route. The Sfat Emet, and the Sfat Emet, it's not in the normal versions of the Sfat Emet. I could not find the passage, so you're going to have to trust me on this one. But he asks a number of questions on this passage. The first question he asks is, Bnei Yisrael sent to Edom. They say, let us pass through your land. Edom says no. And then Bnei Yisrael ask a second time. Why do they ask a second time? Did they not understand the first time? Or what did they think was going to be different the second time they asked? Right, in their second request, they say, verse 19, Bimsila na'aleh. We will go, we will stay on the path, and we'll pay for whatever we drink. Right? What's the significance of emphasizing that they're going to stay on this path, on this narrow path? And number 3, I didn't read this far, but the very next thing that appears in the Torah, verse 22, they leave Kadesh and they go to Hor Hahar. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe ve'el Aaron b'Hor Hahar al Gvul Eretz Edom lemor. God speaks to Moshe and Aaron. Yasef Aaron el Amav. Kilo yavo el haaretz asher natati livnei Yisrael al asher miritem et pi lemei meriva. Aaron is going to die, and he will not enter the land because you rebelled against me with the Mei Meriva, with hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. We're not going to get into all the discussion of what exactly happened in that episode, but Aaron, we know, is not going to enter the land, so this is where Aaron is going to die. Why does that immediately follow the passage of Edom? Those are the three questions the Sfat Emet asks. Okay, so question number one is why do they ask Edom a second time for permission to pass through their land? Number two, why do they emphasize that they will stay on the Derech HaMelech, on the Mesilah, on this path, on this highway? How would that in any way convince Edom to let them pass through? And number three, why does the Torah tell us of Aaron's death immediately afterwards? So the Sfat Emet suggests that the first time Bnei Israel asked for permission from Edom to pass through their land, Edom and maybe Bnei Israel assumed that they would be traveling in the way they normally traveled. How do they normally travel? With the clouds of God, with the Ananim leading the way and providing protection. They ask a second time, and they say, B'mesilah nelech na'avor. We'll stay on the path, and many translate it as the narrow path. When they had the clouds surrounding them, so then we see that their camp was very big and very vast and very wide.
Mm-hmm.
So they're telling Edom, don't worry. We're not if you're afraid of letting us pass through your land, so we'll pass through your land in a non-miraculous way. We'll pass through as regular people. We'll stay on the narrow path without the aid and assistance of the clouds that normally accompany us. That's why they ask a second time, says the Sfat Emet, and that's why they emphasize that they'll stay on this narrow path. B'mesilah na'avor. What does this have to do with Aaron's death? The Gemara tells us that the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, were B'zchut Aaron HaKohen, were in the merit of Aaron. Once Bnei Yisrael are willing to give up on these protective clouds and say, we don't need the clouds, Edom, just let us pass through. We want to go in the quickest way. We want the least hassle. Once they are giving up on the clouds or disparaging the clouds in one way or another, they no longer have need, as it were, for Aaron. Right? Aaron, the clouds are because of Aaron. Once they give up on the clouds, then they're giving up on Aaron. And that's why Aaron dies at this moment. So it's another episode, right, according to this, of where we have a sort of disparaging of the clouds, where they don't show the proper appreciation, the proper gratitude, the proper recognition of this great miracle of the clouds. Again, I'm not sure exactly how else to connect the two stories other than we see the implication of rejecting the clouds and not being properly appreciative of them is bad things happen. Aaron dies, they start complaining, right? They go on the path which is going to lead them to an extra 40 years of travel in the desert, all because they don't appreciate the greatness of the gift of the Ananim, of the clouds that provided this protection for them. Any thoughts or questions on any of that?
Rabbi, I did want to offer one other interpretation. This is from Rav Hirsch.
Okay.
It's always been one of my favorites altogether. I find it so inspiring, but there are connections of it with some of the things you've already said. So I just thought maybe you might like to hear. So he says it's really about the march of the Torah into the world. And so it is a picture of what will happen over our whole history, knowing that we will have enemies who do not like the Torah. They see how different it is from their culture, and they come to hate us course, they always have reasons to hate us. But anyway, in the Torah, when it comes to the Torah, there's such a stark difference in many ways from their ways, that the reference to the enemies. See, so this is perhaps a way to focus his
Yeah,
point.
yeah. It's a
Who are the enemies that are being talked about here?
mm-hmm.
Now, that could be the basis for not only the hunch that, for us it's a hunch, but for them, I guess they knew in the Gemara, that the people had had enough of the Torah. Okay, you mentioned that some
Right,
of the
the
Ridovanim
Ramban.
or mitzvahs,
Yeah.
they'd had enough Torah, and so the Torah said, okay, well then we're going to have to leave. And those who are within, it's the large mob that starts out with the complaining. By the way, not necessarily all the Israelites, but anyway, that there are enemies within, and so we have to leave. And they want to, and they flee from before your presence. So that's where the emphasis on it being God's mountain comes in.
Right.
But he's also, the second part of it could be seen as such a reassurance that eventually the Torah will come home to, and Hashem will come home to the myriads of the thousands of Israel. Now, there is an interpretation of that as 22,000 myriads, 2 myriads, and 2,000s. But he points out that that's really not in quite the correct order when one is giving forth numbers in Hebrew, so that it could refer to all our descendants throughout all of history, and that homecoming will be fantastic. And so it looks forward to the day of the Mashiach. So I just thought I would offer that as a way of bringing together some of the things that you had
Beautiful.
said. Things
Thank
like
you
a couple of them fit
yes.
in here.
Yes, beautiful. And it's emphasized, right, when we think about our davening, when we say this pasuk of Vayimin Toraron, and then we say Ki mitzion te'etei Torah, that the Torah will come out of Zion, right? That it will from Jerusalem go and spread and expand to the entire world. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So one final thought. One final thought is a short idea from Rabbi Norman Lamb, who notes, right, and I just brought a pasuk again, which is familiar to us. When Yaakov blesses his grandsons, he says, "Hamalach hagoel otimi korah yivarech et hane'arim, bikari behem shemi, b'shem avotai Avam v'Yitzchak." The angel who saves me from all evil should bless these children and call them by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. V'yidgu larov b'kerev haaretz, may they be, it's translated as teeming multitudes upon the earth, but literally v'yidgu means they should be like fish. Right? Fish have lots of baby fish born at one time. That's why it means teeming. But v'yidgu larov, if you look in the Targum Onkelos, and again, I could have just bought an Aramaic dictionary, but the word, right, Onkelos translates v'yidgu as
Yama.
V'yitzchak v'chanune yama yesigu. I didn't put those boldness. I would have put bold chanune, right? V'chanune yama yesigun. Bego b'nei ensha al ara. They should, like the nune yama, the fish of the sea, have lots of offspring on the earth. The Aramaic for fish is nun. The word nun in Aramaic means fish. So back to the Tzor Hamor, who wanted to know why specifically the letter nun was used to indicate this. Rabbi Lamb says that Bnei Yisrael are giving the bracha to be like fish because fish are always swimming against the currents. Right. So to complement what Anne just said in the name of a verse, that we're all right, that to be a Jew is to always swim, is to swim against the currents. And so that those nuns should emphasize to us this message and this essential character trait, that it's when we travel, when we leave Har Sinai, the world is not going to necessarily be a warm, fuzzy place for us, right? We're going to have to go against a lot of what is thrown our way, but we have the Torah and we should have the confidence to be able to do that. So there's some beautiful ideas that are associated with this, and the Vayivin Soa, the backwards nuns, the third sefer. But I think Robert asked a really important question, which is, they couldn't stay at Har Sinai forever. So right, we all recognize that they, and like people, you can't stay in yeshiva forever. But you have to go out into the world and be a productive member of society. So what the balance is one interesting question. But right, that most of the commentaries understand that part of the problem, the Gemara tells us that leaving Har Sinai was a problem. So if we understand that you can't stay at Har Sinai forever, so what would the problem have been? It has to be something in the attitude. So whether it was an attitude of they were too excited to leave, of they didn't appreciate enough, right? And that brings us to some really beautiful insights and interpretations and messages, which hopefully continue to resonate with us.
I have one more to offer that's right
One more.
the lines. Okay, it's from the Rebbe.
Yeah.
And of course, the 7 refers to the 7 emotions of the powers of the soul, but 5 of them really concentrate pretty much on the person themselves, like the chesed and the gevura, the strictness, and the teferet and the beauty, and the netzach, a sense of endurance, and so on, and the humility. But the last 2, the 6th and the 7th, are when one person turns entirely to another person and takes them on. That's the sod, the connection. And the 7th one is malchus, which is a way of, in complete humility, trying to assemble a whole group of people who will follow God's will. And those are hard to do. It's like he's saying, yes, this is a transition point now. They've had their time to kind of work on themselves, not their relationships with one another so much. But now we have to really work on our relationships with one another as we're moving along and we're getting ready to set up a whole society and all of that. And it's going to be hard. He's letting us know this. By the way, this is set in the middle here. So we should not be discouraged. We should know that this is where things can get very difficult, but it doesn't matter because ultimately it will be all right. That kind of thing. But we can expect that it is hard, and so it is important for us to work on it nonetheless.
Very nice. All right. Thank you, everyone. It's good to be back. I look forward to continuing next week. Parshat Shlach. This Shabbos in Shul is the graduates Kiddush. We're going to recognize and honor everyone in the Nitivot family that is graduating from one level of school or another. It'll be a beautiful enhanced Kiddush. Hope to see everyone there, and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You should have only shir nachas through this whole week.
Thank you. Beha'alotecha.
Beha'alotecha.